No, really. What is the alt-left? Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I have to do this again. I have to define the alt-left because now that people are actually using the label, it turns out that a number of people are getting it wrong. Perhaps even most of them. But before I do that, I just need to say that I want people who are into my channel to please click the bell button next to the subscribe button so that you don't get unsubscribed from my channel, because I have been being hit pretty hard by the unsubscribe bug this past month especially. Anyhow, about the alt-left. Fox News and maybe some other conservative sources have been apparently telling people that the alt-left is actually basically the regressive left. You know, the Antifa, anarcho-communist types, or anybody else who is obsessed with protest activism and policing people's language, who think that Islam is compatible with feminism, and actively will try to shut down speaking events like Milo Yiannopoulos because they think words are violent. You know, those type of fuckers. Lumping the alt-left together with these people is just untrue, of course, because it would seem that the majority of the left actually thinks in these terms, though maybe not so radically as the Antifa types. The people who advocate against freedom of speech, praise Islam, and care more about the color of people's skin than their actual ideas are the regressive left. And the alt-left is the alternative to those people. We thought that that was obvious. On the other side of the misinformation fence, we have people from the regressive mainstream corporate left writing smear articles about the alt-left, not really being super clear either about what they think the alt-left actually is. I am guessing because they don't actually know what the alt-left is, besides that it is against their regressive publications. These publications just kind of act like the alt-left is a miscellaneous grab bag of various leftists that they don't seem to like very much, for whatever reason, probably because we don't like them. So I'm here to set the record straight the best I can. But why am I qualified to do this? Well, I was one of the first people to coin the term alt-left, and I did so independently of the other couple of people who had begun using the term before I came up with it. I made a video in September of 2016 where I defined what I wanted the label of alt-left to be, as I was prompted to do so because I kept being accused of being alt-right by regressive leftists on the internet when I would do things like criticize feminism or post a link to a Milo Yiannopoulos lecture, even just warning them about him, that he was coming and that he was going to be famous, because they hadn't ever heard of him at the time. But since I would even post a video of Milo Yiannopoulos, they thought I must be some alt-right troll. The label has morphed a bit since then, but at the time, while the election hadn't happened, it was very useful to describe myself. You see, during the actual election campaign, there was this notion that anybody who criticized the left in any way must be a full-blown evil right-wing bigot, a sentiment which hasn't gone away entirely. As somebody who has always been critical of my own social groups and have willfully changed entire social universes in the past, I was immediately skeptical of what I refer to now as fourth wave intersectional feminist social justice, when it became exponentially popular starting in 2012 or so. All of the sudden, around the time that the Black Lives Matter rhetoric started, it wasn't enough to just not be racist, transphobic, to not be misogynistic or homophobic anymore. After 2012, everybody was presumed bigoted until proven innocent, including gay white men like myself, who I swear to God were held to an even higher standard than straight white men in certain situations, because all of the sudden people were trying to accuse gay men of being traitors to racial minorities and women for reasons that I don't want to get into. All of the sudden people were saying, just because you're gay doesn't mean you're not a bigot. It was creepy. By the time the election rolled around, I was thoroughly tired of the constant paranoia from the social justice warrior regressive left. It was a constant witch hunt that I couldn't quite understand. Even though I had so much experience with it, I didn't really know where I thought it was coming from. That is, until I was a heavy Sanders supporter, and then the bigotry accusations ended up coming from the Clinton campaign when they started using the same rhetoric to demonize Sanders supporters. They called us Bernie bros, and they said that we were racist, misogynist white guys for not wanting to smash the patriarchy and put a woman in office, blah, blah, blah. When really, if we wanted to look at policies, Sanders was a far more consistent candidate for civil rights and offered things that could actually help the average American of all colors if these ideas would actually work economically. And I do mean if, which is another story about these ideas working economically in the current economy of America. But moving on. After Sanders officially lost to Clinton in a primary race so unfair, not just systemically in terms of corruption within the DNC, but also in terms of the media shafting Sanders on regressive outlets like the New York Times and CNN, as well as downright smearing of Sanders supporters by feminist propaganda sites like Everyday Feminism, who did things like depicting a Sanders rally to be full of screaming racists in this panel here, I decided that I officially had enough and began making videos almost every day and refused to fall in line with Clinton Incorporated when they demanded I support Hillary just to stop Trump. I never ended up jumping over to endorse Trump like a lot of former Sanders supporters ended up doing, because there were numerous things I didn't like about him during the campaign, but I don't want to get into those. More so, while a lot of people kept accusing me of being alt-right for paying attention to Milo Yiannopoulos and predicting that he'd be a big star, perhaps even more people kept accusing me of being a libertarian, which I resented because I've known libertarians online for over 10 years, and there's several things about that philosophy that I just don't agree with. And so, because although I don't like labels, I decided to come up with a vague label for myself, as people were trying so desperately to put me into a box, and I knew that there was a new political zeitgeist forming of people who were probably lifelong Democrats until Clinton and Democratic Party Incorporated showed their true colors in 2016, and that label that I came up with was the alt-left. And I came up with it in September. You can watch that video for yourself and see what I said at the time, but almost immediately after making the video, my now friend Ryan England, who has a channel called Samas.broadcasts, ended up finding me, and that's how we made friends. He and one other guy had already been using the label alt-left, and while I haven't spoken much to the other guy, and I'm not sure that I agree with him about absolutely everything, Ryan, who is Samas.broadcasts, and I seem to have almost an identical version of the political future for the West that we seem to want. Check out his channel, link in the description. Soon after, Ryan and a few other friends of ours that we had networked with online began being involved in a forum which had very few people but now has a whole bunch more. And it's pure chaos, to be truthful, to the point where I realized that I don't personally want to overly associate myself with the alt-left label all that much because people get the wrong impression sometimes, and again, I don't like labels. I think that what's going on is that as the label of alt-left is used more and more, and Hillary Clinton has already been defeated, there's more and more left-leaning people who are wanting a new tribalistic identity to associate with. But probably more than half of the time, the people that find their way into the alt-left forum seem to have little idea at all what the alt-left actually was started to be. Truthfully, there's even a lot of disagreement between the longer-standing members of the group, the moderators, and other people that we like pretty well. I would attribute this to the fact that the left is really kind of going back to the drawing board overall in terms of figuring out where the left will go next, and the alt-left is trying to figure out where to go from here in its own right. That all said, Obviously, I can be only somewhat vague, but after heavily debating the label since September and speaking to many people about what the alt-left is, here's some things that it definitely is. The alt-left prides itself on skepticism of ideologies. It does not like fourth-wave intersectional feminist social justice as a model for achieving fairness for the masses, and actually feels that the corporate Democrats appropriated the struggles of the working poor, minorities, and the disadvantage of many varieties in order to get votes, even though it was clearly not in their best interest to support Clinton Incorporated. To put it simply, we care more about uniting the masses for a common good than putting them into neatly packaged categories of who gets paid attention to because they can make a case that they are the most oppressed, generally based on their skin color and gender. We think that it's bigoted to think that way, and we think the left needs to stop doing that. Also, the alt-left is neither nationalist nor globalist at the current juncture, because although we are future-minded and do not rule out the possibility of a harmonious global government existing someday, we mostly feel that the world isn't ready for it at this moment, largely because Islamic governments do not seem to play nice with others. The alt-left generally does not endorse Black Lives Matter as an ideology because we see it as a non-constructive distraction from more tangible ways to actually help the Black community, and we feel that whatever noble purpose it might have started with seems to be diluted with, at best, a lot of confusion and at worst, a lot of bigotry. The alt-left does, however, support police reform and does admit that the Black community has suffered a lot of racism and specific problems that should continue to be addressed. The alt-left does not agree with blaming the Jews for all of the world's problems, as if Jewish people have socially engineered reality to embrace multiculturalism as a way to keep everybody fighting so that the Jews get away scot-free from any persecution. Or whatever certain radical members of the alt-right seem to think. The alt-left is not super keen on that specific conspiracy theory, though some people do examine cultural Marxism as a lens to view social justice, and that's fine. The alt-left is also not white nationalist, and I would say most members are fine with a certain amount of multiculturalism as long as it makes for a harmonious society. However, members of the alt-left do not think it's productive to demonize white people relentlessly by any means, as we see that as bigoted by itself and also responsible for the rise of legitimate white supremacy, which we want to avoid. Very importantly, the alt-left is in favor of a social safety net for citizens, which is something that differentiates us from the libertarians. As I mentioned before, we believe universal health care would be a great idea if we could get it to work, and we imagine a world someday with universal basic income, but that might be a dream for now. Basically, the alt-left is a bunch of sane classical liberals with a bit more optimism in terms of trying things out in the future that haven't necessarily worked in the past than libertarians. It's commonly said that we live in a socialist utopia these days compared to 200 years ago if we look at the city roads that we have and other such things. So why is it so foolish to imagine that things will continue to improve? Regardless, I hope this sets the record straight, coming from somebody that has actually used the label alt-left to describe myself. Like so many labels, people are usually using it to describe others, but I've been told I'm the biggest YouTuber that actually describes myself this way on occasion, so I figured I should be the one to deliver the message of what the alt-left really is. However, it should be of note that there are bigger YouTube personalities that seem to have a lot in common with the alt-left identified people, such as Sargon of Akkad, Jeff Holiday, Wizard of Cause, and Vernaculus, but I've never heard them describe themselves as alt-left, so I don't want to call them that. Okay, that's all for today. Drop me a comment, help me out on Patreon if I seem cool. Be sure to hit that bell button next to the subscribe button so that you don't get unsubscribed from my channel, like I said before, and stay tuned.